What if the reason you can't prove God exists isn't because there's no answer, but because you've been asking the wrong question from the very beginning? Not because God is hidden, distant, or impossible to reach, but because the definition you started with already limits what you're allowed to find. Think about it. At some point, you were taught to imagine God as something, somewhere, someone watching, judging, deciding. But what if that assumption is the real trap? Because the moment you define God as a being, you shrink something infinite into something measurable, and that might be the first mistake you didn't even realize you made. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. This doesn't just affect believers. It means skeptics might be trapped in the exact same framework without noticing it. One side defends God as a supernatural entity, the other rejects it for lack of evidence, but both are arguing inside the same invisible box they never questioned. But what if that box itself is the problem? What if God isn't something inside reality at all, but something reality itself depends on to exist? Now pause for a second. Before asking if God exists, shouldn't you first ask what you even mean when you say the word God? Because the moment you redefine that question, something strange happens. The entire debate you thought you understood starts to collapse in a way you didn't expect. So imagine this carefully. What if God isn't a being at all, but the very structure that makes existence possible in the first place? Not a creator sitting outside the universe, but the underlying fabric, the laws, the patterns, the order that give rise to everything you experience right now. This idea isn't new, but almost no one sits with it long enough for it to actually change how they see reality on a deeper level. I'm Marcus, and I observe and decode ideas like this. If you're into thinking differently about reality, consider subscribing, because this is just the surface. Some philosophers have suggested that God and nature aren't separate things, but the same underlying reality expressed in two completely different ways, which means what you call God might not be an entity at all, but the coherence, the order, the intelligibility that makes existence make sense. And this is where things shift, because science doesn't enter to prove God, it enters to challenge what you think reality even is. Take something simple. Matter feels solid, stable, real, but physics tells you that what you're touching isn't actually what you think it is. At a deeper level, matter isn't solid at all. It's energy, constantly shifting, transforming, existing as part of an ongoing process rather than a fixed thing. So what feels like separate objects might actually be expressions of something far more unified underneath, something you don't directly perceive. And then things get even stranger when you go deeper into the quantum level, where reality stops behaving the way your intuition expects it to. Particles don't act like solid things. They behave like waves, like probabilities, like possibilities that only become definite when observed. And this is where it becomes unsettling, because reality doesn't seem fully independent from how it's measured or interacted with. Now don't misunderstand this. Your mind isn't creating reality, but it does show that reality is far less simple than it appears on the surface. Because the deeper you go, the less the universe looks like separate pieces and more like one interconnected system expressing itself in different forms. And then comes one of the strangest discoveries: entanglement, where distance itself stops behaving the way you assume it should. Two particles, separated by vast distances, still affect each other instantly, as if separation itself isn't as fundamental as it feels. Just sit with that for a moment. What you experience as distance and separation might not actually be as real as it appears. So now you're left with a very different picture of reality, deeply connected, structured, unified beneath the surface of what you perceive. And none of this proves God exists, but it does something more powerful. It forces you to rethink the question itself. Because now the issue isn't whether God exists as a being, but whether reality itself points towards something deeper beneath it. And here's the shift. Science can explain how things work, but it stays completely silent on why anything exists at all. It can describe matter, energy, forces, and interactions, but it cannot answer why there is something instead of absolutely nothing. And that question, as simple as it sounds, pushes you beyond the limits of what science was ever designed to answer. Because every explanation assumes something already exists, and that assumption is never explained by the system itself. So you end up at the edge of understanding, where logic, physics, and observation stop giving clear, satisfying answers. And this is exactly where philosophy begins. not to give you answers, but to change how you see the question itself. What if God isn't an explanation at all, but a lens, a way of interpreting the structure and coherence you observe in reality? Suddenly, belief isn't about accepting a claim. It becomes a perspective, a way of framing what reality fundamentally is. And disbelief isn't necessarily rejection. It might just be choosing not to interpret reality through that particular lens. Which means both sides could be looking at the exact same universe, but describing it using completely different languages. One calls it divine, the other calls it natural, but both might be pointing toward the same underlying patterns without realizing it. And here's where things become subtle. If God is the structure of reality itself, then trying to prove it starts to lose meaning. Because you can't prove the foundation of existence using tools that already depend on that very foundation to function. It's like trying to step outside reality to examine it, when every step you take is already happening inside it. So, the question, does God exist, doesn't get answered. It begins to dissolve because it may have been framed incorrectly from the start. And what replaces it is something far more unsettling, a deeper question that doesn't offer a clean or comfortable answer. Why does anything exist at all, instead of nothing? Not just how things work, but why there is something that works in the first place, instead of absolute emptiness. And the moment you sit with that question, certainty starts to feel a little premature, maybe even misplaced. Because whether you believe or don't believe, you're still standing inside the same unexplained existence. The universe is here, structured, intelligible, capable of producing consciousness that can question its own existence. And that alone is strange enough to resist any simple explanation, whether scientific, philosophical, or theological. So maybe the goal isn't to prove God or disprove it, but to recognize how deep the question actually goes. Because reality might not fit into categories like exists or doesn't exist in the way you've been trained to think. It might be something deeper than both belief and disbelief are capable of fully capturing or defining. And this is where the conversation shifts, from certainty to curiosity, not forcing an answer, but learning to sit with the mystery without rushing to close it too quickly. Because the moment you stop needing a conclusion, you start seeing reality in a completely different way. And maybe that's the point, not to solve the question, but to realize just how deep it actually goes. Because whatever this reality is, it's far more complex than any single explanation you've ever been given. And maybe the most honest position isn't belief or disbelief, but the quiet recognition that you don't fully understand it yet.